Hey everyone, welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to my next video in a series of videos where I'm ranking through every Disney era in Disney animation. If you want to check out my very first video ranking the Disney Golden Age, there I set all the criteria as for which films I will be covering in this series, as well as my schedule for the upcoming videos. Today we're talking about the Disney Dark Age, which is a very interesting time to talk about, particularly because this is the first era without the touch of Walt Disney, and some might say that this is going to spell immediate disaster, and financially it did. A lot of these films on this list did not make a lot of money, and they were not given the best budgets, so the actual animation itself is a significant step lower than everything that came before it and everything that would come after it. But I don't think the Dark Age deserves to be under the same umbrella in terms of quality. Whereas Walt Disney did pass away in the late 60s and these films were not overseen by him, I still think there's still a lot of magic that comes from some of the creators who helped bring these films to life. I actually think some of these films are some of the most underrated Disney films of all time. It just so happens though that the lowest films on this particular ranking, it just pales in comparison to so many other eras. I do greatly prefer this era to the wartime era, a video I've already done, but this age in particular just has more misses than hits, I think, because overall, because of financing, a lot of the films feel like they're missing something. This Dark Age has a very minimal amount of big production musical numbers, something that we'd see a lot of in the Disney Renaissance, which is going to be the next ranking I do. And you can also see the stories themselves are going in a darker direction. They're kind of going for something a little bit more adult and a little bit more mature in themes. Disney has made a lot of dark films in nature and in subject matter, but I think these films, especially because they lack a lot of musical numbers, because the animation's a little less, because the budget in general limited them so much creatively, I just think these films as a whole suffer because of it. But like I said, there are some gems here, so let's rank these films from 8 to 1. There are 8 films in this Disney Dark Age spanning from 1970 to 1988. This is a period of time, like I said, right after Walt Disney's death and leading up to the resurgence of Disney's popularity with the Disney Renaissance. But we're going to start at number 8 with The Black Cauldron. This is a film that I know has a very big cult following. A lot of people kind of rally behind this film as one of this is the greatest underrated masterpiece that Disney's made, and honestly, I wish I was one of those fans. I really do, because I really do appreciate the darker atmosphere here. Like I said, Disney tried its best to go with more mature themes, more adult themes, and this film definitely feels like it. There's very minimal humor to be found. There's very minimal light to be found here. It's a very dark film just in its animation style. I actually think of these films, this is one of the better animated films in terms of the drawings themselves. I love the darker aesthetics, the darker nature of its dark fantasy. Arise, my messengers of death. Just because a film is different doesn't necessarily mean it's good. And in The Black Cauldron's case, I think it has a lot of style, and it takes big swings in being so different and trying to set itself apart from so many other Disney films. But while it sets itself apart aesthetically and tonally and stylistically, I think Black Cauldron kind of abandons a storyline that is engaging, a storyline that has any heart. I think the characters themselves aren't particularly interesting, except for Gurgi, who is the cute little sidekick. He actually has a similar voice to Gollum from Lord of the Rings, so you can kind of get this similar parallel with the kind of troublemaker who has a good heart inside of him but is corrupted by darkness. But in this case, he actually succumbs to the greatness. He actually becomes a hero at the end, which is kind of nice to see, kind of a break of that stereotype.
Ooh, great prince! Give poor starving Gurgi munchings and crunchings. Nice apple.
But I do wish this film in general just had more of an intriguing story, something to rope me in and pull me in closer to the narrative itself. I talked about with Peter Pan in the last video that I think that film really warrants a remake, and I think this film as well really warrants a remake. I think this would be a really fun exercise for someone like David Lowery or like Guillermo del Toro, someone who's really good at a darker, creepier aesthetic, but can also tell a pretty successful fairy tale, because I think that's what this film is missing. It's all dark, it's all about its aesthetic, but it loses some of the actual storytelling elements, the magic that we've seen in so many other Disney films, and I feel like a different director might be able to bring that storytelling strength to the already dark aesthetic. This is a case where I think the studio took such a big swing, but ultimately struck out because it was not able to make contact with any of the pitches thrown its way. Yes, I'm making baseball puns. It's been a very baseball-heavy season, as you can see by my getup. I'm in baseball mode right now.
I'm afraid it'll soon be over for us.
I really wanted to love this movie because I know it has a cult following, but ultimately, I just can't see past the flaws. Our time has arrived. At At number 7, we have the Aristocats. Now, the Aristocats is an interesting scenario because this is the first of the Dark Age. This is the first film coming off of a successful run of Silver Age films. This is the first film to kind of kick off this era, and I think while it is not the worst film of the era, obviously I have it ranked at number 7, I think it kind of exemplifies all the flaws that this era in particular has. I think the music is less memorable than all the stuff that came before it. I think the animation is a substantial step down. I think the characters themselves, while cute, are not nearly as memorable or iconic as the other characters that came before it. I think this film just kind of takes everything Disney was doing so well and just kicks it down a notch. And while this film is probably a little bit more rewatchable than even some of the films I have higher on the list, I just think because it is that kind of start, it's that trendsetter for so much bad stuff to come, I think we have to kind of knock the Aristocats because it set this downward avalanche-like trajectory for this studio.
Wait a minute, I'm the leader. I'm the one that says when we go. Here we go.
Now, where I think this succeeds over The Black Cauldron is that, yes, it has some lighter moments, it has some more relatable themes. I think you can latch onto the story in a much easier manner than you can with The Black Cauldron. But then again, I don't think the story itself is that interesting either. It feels like it's kind of trying to be a companion piece to something like 101 Dalmatians, Lady and the Tramp, where, you know, these characters are just kind of taking in the atmosphere of the world around them and interacting with one another in these sweet, pleasant stories. The only thing is that 101 Dalmatians does it with so much great writing and great immersion of the London culture, and same with Lady and the Tramp. It really immerses itself in that Italian life with beautiful imagery. And here, I think because the animation is lesser, because they just don't have the means to kind of cover so much ground animation-wise, we don't really get a lot of that Paris flair. We hear it a little bit with the music, with some accents, and yes, there are some background snippets of, you know, the Eiffel Tower and, you know, the famous rivers and streets and stuff, but it just doesn't feel like it immerses us in Paris like the films that it's trying to replicate 101 Dalmatians and Lady and the Tramp do with their settings. So for that reason, I think the Aristocats is less of a big meow and more of a dull roar when kicking off this era of animation.
Ruby, Mama!
This is outrageous, crazy.
At number 6, I have The Rescuers. The Rescuers is a really interesting case because I like how this film tries to tackle a much more mature subject. This is a film about two mice who are part of this rescue society who are going to rescue an abducted girl who's abducted in the Louisiana bayou in order to become basically a servant in finding these jewels.
That little brat is going to find me that diamond tomorrow, or else.
She essentially gets taken into child slavery, and that's a very dark, mature theme, and it's something we'd see a little bit with like Don Bluth's films of a similar era. You know, these darker stories presented in a more family-friendly manner, and I was hoping The Rescuers would go that route, would really kind of embrace that more mature, nuanced theme, because unlike The Black Cauldron, I think this is a very fascinating story. I think it has something that audiences can really relate to and find some emotional ties to. But the problem is that it then tries to be a little bit too much of the happy, fun, adventurous kind of story. We kind of lose sight of the main through line of Penny, this girl who is abducted and who just wants a family and who feels alone and who wants this help.
Well, if I don't get back to the orphanage, I'll never get adopted.
Adopted? What makes you think anyone would want a homely little girl like you?
And yes, Bernard and Bianca are fun characters to follow, but it feels like it takes more of a route of let's have this fun, rousing adventure rather than let's really get to the crux of the really tragic but ultimately hopefully hopeful story at the end of this tunnel. And I just feel like it spends too much time meandering in the middle, trying to make it more family friendly, more entertaining. And I think that's just one of the things that Dark Age does poorly, is trying to manage the mature themes with the lighter fare that Disney has been used to. I think Black Cauldron goes too dark, whereas this film, I think, didn't go dark enough, and I think that's kind of where this lacks. And I think we'll talk about the sequel in the next video. I think The Rescuers Down Under actually is a significant improvement on this film because The Rescuers Down Under actually embraces the fact that it is an adventure film, and it actually wants to go adventure from full beginning to end, whereas here it feels like it wants to be this really important, beautiful piece on character and tragedy and grief and loneliness, but then it decides to become an adventure film half the way through, and I just don't think those tones really necessarily blend with one another. I will say though, the voice performances here are great, and that's actually why this is higher on the list. I think the actual characters of Bernard and Bianca and Penny are really, really amazing. Even though the villain is a little weak, I still like the idea of this swamp-like area as a kind of setting for this villain, this kind of icky, murky aesthetic that I really like about this film. I think the animation of all these films, I think The Rescuers has the weakest animation, just stylistically, which also knocks it down a few pegs. But this is a film where I would go back to revisit it because I think it has some glimmers of brilliance, but it doesn't all come together in a cohesive whole. At number 5, I have Oliver and Company, and I'll be honest, I probably would have put this a little lower on the list, but because I am a New Yorker, because I get to experience the roar and rush of the crowd in the city every single day, and because I love Billy Joel, he's my favorite singer, favorite musical artist, I have a soft spot for this film. I just love the Billy Joel music. I'm street smart. I got New York City heart. I love the New York aesthetic. I love the immersion with New York culture. I think the dogs and cats, the actual creatures, are cute. I think it's very well animated, especially considering some of these other films are not very well animated. I think the animation is nice.
It was your turn to get the food today. It's newspaper burritos again.
Hey, whoa. Cool it, Dodger fans.
The problem I have with Oliver and Company is that the great songs, the great use of atmosphere, a lot of it is shown so early on in the film that after 20 minutes, it just loses a little bit of the magic. It loses some of the luster. The two best parts of the film are the songs Once Upon a Time in New York and Why Should I Worry? Why should I worry? Why should I care? And those two songs happen in the first 10-15 minutes of the movie. Oliver and Company has such a great first act that I almost wish the rest of the film had followed suit, and it could have been maybe a contender for my favorite of this era, but because all the good stuff happens so early on, it's hard for me to stay on board for the rest of it.
Hey man, this stuff is boring, man.
I like Oliver Twist as a story. I think this is an interesting take on the Oliver Twist story. It takes a lot of liberties, but I think that's okay. I mean, my favorite Disney film of all time is based on a Shakespeare play, and it takes some liberties. We'll talk about it next week. I'm teasing a lot for next week because I promise next week's video, I'm going to be a lot more positive than these movies. Oliver and Company, kind of a dud, but it starts off really strong, and I do think its highs are very, very noteworthy, so it ranks somewhere in the middle of this list. Moving on to number 4, we have The Great Mouse Detective. Now, whereas I think Oliver and Company starts strong and then ends weak, I think Great Mouse Detective starts pretty weak, peaks in the middle, drops off again, and then ends really high. But the thing with Great Mouse Detective is that the peaks are so high. I think the Radigan production number is one of the best Disney musical numbers, especially in this age, because like I said earlier, the music is just absent from this era. I think The Rescuers has one song, but it's a non-diegetic song. The Black Cauldron doesn't have any music. The Aristocats has some songs, but only one of them is really noteworthy. And Oliver and Company, like I said, the music happens so early on that by the end of it, you almost kind of forget that it is a musical. The Great Mouse Detective has an amazing musical number as well.
Oh, Radigan! Oh, Radigan! The rest fall behind.
But there's only one of them, and I almost wish that this was made in an era where there was more funding, there was more budgeting, because I think because of the budget cost, The Great Mouse Detective isn't able to have more production numbers, isn't able to have those big spectacle moments like we see at the end. This film ends with the most exhilarating action sequence in any Disney movie, not just this era, but any era. I think the end fight on Big Ben, the big clock tower scene, is the best action set piece in any of these Disney films. And I know these Disney films are more comedies, romances. There aren't really a lot of action films in the Disney canon, but this absolutely has its action elements, and I think that last set piece is so, so good. I just wish there was a bigger budget so we could have had more of those set pieces throughout, more musical numbers throughout, because this feels like they were restrained because of budget to go the full extra mile, and that's why these stuff that isn't these peaks, all the valleys, if you will, just don't feel as worthwhile because of it. I wish it was just more consistent in its entertainment rather than taking that roller coaster ride through the hills and valleys, but because its highs do make it so, so lovable and amazing and engaging and rich to watch, and because it's a fun twist on the Sherlock Holmes story, I will put it all the way up here at number 4. At number 3, we have Robin Hood. Now, I'm a big fan of the Robin Hood character from the original Errol Flynn Robin Hood from the 1930s. I haven't really loved all the recent iterations with Russell Crowe or Taron Egerton, but the character and the actual premise of Robin Hood is such a great story in itself. That's why we've seen so many iterations and interpretations. I think next to the Errol Flynn version, though, this is my favorite version because I like the idea of using these characters of these stories that we know so well and assigning animals to them. You know, the fact that Robin Hood is this sly fox, the fact that Little John is this warm, cuddly bear, even though he's got a killer instinct. You know, the animals, I think, really mirror the characters well, and the choice of which animals to make which characters. It's a very clever idea for Disney to kind of put a spin on a classic tale.
Oh, incidentally, I'm Alan Adeo, a minstrel. Oh, that's an early day folk singer.
I think if this film were made with actual human characters, I think it would have been interesting, but I think because they're animals, there's just a little bit more personality that comes with that I really enjoy. I just think it's a well thought out universe. And this is a film, again, it lacks the great musical numbers. It has some poor animation because the budget cost was low, but I think consistently start to end, it is very engaging. It is a classic tale told in a very classic fashion. It really gets to the basis of what this story is, what its core themes are, and doesn't lose sight of them. And I like that. It's very straightforward, but still very engaging, very entertaining.
You're taking too many chances.
Chances? You must be joking. That was just a bit of a lark, Little John.
I think the action set pieces here are also very fun, very engaging. They don't quite hit the peaks of the Great Clock Tower like I talked about in The Great Mouse Detective, but because there is more action consistently, and because it is really engaging and really inventive, even though we've seen this character time after time after time in so many different iterations, the fact that they're still able to create something new and fresh and vibrant with its action set pieces is a pretty great thing for Disney, I think, at this time, especially because, you know, this era is admittedly weaker than a lot of the other ones. The fact that we have a film that can just solidly entertain for an hour and a half and still get some pretty core themes, some real emotionality through to its audience, I think that's a big win for Disney.
That sounds like another collection day for the poor, eh, Johnny boy?
Yeah. Sweet charity.
At number 2, we have The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. This is hands down my favorite ensemble of characters of any Disney film. I love Pooh, Tigger, Piglet, Owl, Rabbit, Kangaroo. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, this is the best crop of characters Disney has ever put to screen.
You mean elephants and weasels?
That's what I said. Heffalumps and woozles.
Well, what do what do they do?
And I know what people are saying at home. They're saying, Dylan, you've been so critical of the package films, Fantasia, the whole wartime era. You were very critical, and it's true. I have not loved the Disney package films because I feel like all the short films don't necessarily always come together in one cohesive whole. They feel very fragmented, feel very episodic. Here, yes, it is episodic because it's a package film, but because you just have this very clear-cut use of using a storybook to tell these stories, you have the characters that are interconnected between them, this doesn't feel like a package film. It feels like it is one encompassing story about Christopher Robin and his childhood friends, him learning different rights and wrongs and morals through these characters being a reflection of so many different personality types. You know, you have Tigger, who's very hyperactive. You have Eeyore, who's a little bit of a downer. You have Piglet, who's a little nervous. Pooh, who's just a warm, cuddly, sentimental, but also very gullible little bear. But I think because all the shorts have something to do with one another, they all kind of compile into one general theme about childhood and growing up and your childhood friends and different personalities. I think it works really well as a package film. I think this is a film that, yes, you can watch each part of it separately and still enjoy, but as a whole, when it comes together, it still succeeds and still has the same effectiveness as if it were separated up into little different chunks. And I think that's something that none of the package films, Fantasia or the wartime era, were able to accomplish. An overall sense of cohesion, overall one big whole mass thing. And I think that's what The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh does. It wasn't until the Dark Age, which is by many people's estimations one of the worst Disney eras, that they actually perfected one of the methods they tried a whole era to try to perfect and never quite got right. Even my favorite wartime era films aren't able to smoothly, coherently put all those shorts together, and The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh does. So I have to commend it for that.
Hello, I'm Tigger.
Oh, You scared me.
It isn't number one because the top pick just gets me in my feels more than any other film, maybe ever in the Disney canon, but this film is just so delightful. I mean, I don't have to tell you how awesome Winnie the Pooh is. There's a reason why there are so many spin-offs. There are so many series, both the puppet series and the animated series, both more movies. We're going to get to another movie when we talk about the revival era. I mean, they're still cranking out Winnie the Pooh things, and I think that's because the characters endure the test of time. They're all relatable, they're all delightful, they're all so amazingly voiced by all the voice actors, both past and present. All the actors who have voiced these characters at one point or another do such a great job in bringing life to those characters, making them feel like your own very best friends. I mean, I watched this as a kid feeling like they were my friends, and I feel like even as an adult you can watch this film and feel connected to those characters in that way. So for that reason, it's number 2.
The wonderful thing about figures is figures are wonderful things. Their tops are made out of rubber, their bottoms are made out of springs.
But number 1, I have to put it, The Fox and the Hound. This is a film that just gets me right at my heart. I mean, this film, I don't know what it is. Animation is not stellar. It does take a much slower approach. It's not nonstop action from start to finish, but somehow, just because of its simplicity in telling this beautiful story of friendship, these two friends that, have nothing but love in the world to give, nothing but bountiful smiles and fun and friendship, to see them grow up and be separated and learn that they are not necessarily meant to be friends, that, they come from two different worlds. I mean, it was something as a kid growing up that I never really was able to wrap my head around. I was like, why can't they be friends when they're older? Like, what's stopping them from being with each other forever? And I think this is one of those films that can teach kids that kind of harsh truth that not everything lasts forever. But even though something may have an expiration date, doesn't mean we shouldn't still cherish it and, make meaning in the memories we create when we're young. And maybe, just maybe, when we get older, we'll reflect on those. And even if we go our separate ways, we can feel gratitude in the experiences and the memories we've made with one another. And this film, I just think, nails all of that, nails the themes of friendship, really speaks to what it means to be a friend and what it means to make memories and what it means to be young and kind of experience new things, and also deciding when you get older what to let go and what to hold on to, what shapes your experience as a human being, in this case a fox or a hound. The scene in the middle where Todd's owner has to basically free him in the wild, I mean, it's what we've seen with Jessie in Toy Story 2. It's this idea of having such comfort in your everyday life and then having it all of a sudden, turn on you, but not because of any malice, but just growing old and growing up and growing apart and just having to move on and change. Just the harsh acceptance of that reality, it's crushing. It's crushing to watch, especially as a kid. But I think growing older, I'm able to appreciate these themes even more than I did as a kid. But even as a kid, I still grasp these themes, and I think that's what The Fox and the Hound does so well. It has so many mature themes, but it does have enough intrigue for a younger audience with its playful characters, with its great side characters. There's a great subplot of the little woodpecker. I really think this is the best overall marriage of darker, mature themes with a more fun, Disney-like aesthetic and atmosphere and tone, to where it's this perfect yin and yang of hot and cold, of dark and light, that I really like to see, especially in this dark era, especially when there's an absence of musical numbers, an absence of budget, an absence of animation quality. I still think Fox and the Hound, despite its flaws, is able to ring true because of the story it's telling and because of the emotional core it brings to the audiences that watch it. And that's why this has to be number 1, because it transcends everything that the dark era has consistently tried to bring down with all these films. This didn't let any of those flaws get to it, because it was able to tell a story that would have been as timeless in the 1930s as it would in the 2020s, as it did in the 1980s. So this is hands down my favorite film of the Disney dark era, and honestly a dark horse contender for my favorite Disney film of all time.
My, look at that. A fox and a hound playing together.
So what are some of your favorite Disney Dark Age films? Let me know in the comments down below what your ranking would be. And if you agree with me, let me know down below. And if you disagree, that's fine too. Just do it respectfully down below. Next week, I will be talking about the Disney Renaissance. This was really the resurgence of the Disney brand. These are the classics of my childhood, the movies that I grew up with, the Disney Renaissance, and they are some of the best films of all time. So I cannot wait to talk about those next week, as well as showing you an episode of Picture This for the year 1991 that covers one of those films, Beauty and the Beast, in great detail, as well as The Silence of the Lambs, which ended up winning Best Picture for 1991, inspired by the Halloween holidays. So yes, we're kind of killing two birds with one stone, doing a year that covers both Disney animation and the Halloween horror movie seasons. So check out Picture This coming out on Monday, and check out my new video for the Disney Renaissance coming a week from today. Until then, don't eat too much, honey. I'll see you next time.